The National Policy on Education 1986 and the Program of Action 1992 gives the basic policy framework for education, emphasizing on correcting the existing inequalities. It stresses on reducing dropout rates, improving learning achievements, and expanding access to students who have not had an easy opportunity to be part of general system. The NPE 1986 envisaged some measures for integration of children with physical and mental handicap with the general community as equal partners, preparing them for their normal growth and development and enabling them to face life with courage and confidence. India has also been a signatory to international declarations like the Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action on Special Needs Education 1994 and the Bivaco Millennium Framework for Action 2002 and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2006 that emphasizes the need for fundamental educational policy shifts to enable general schools to include children with disabilities. The centrally sponsored scheme of integrated education for the disabled children, revised in 1992, is presently being implemented in states and union territories in over 90,000 schools, benefiting over 2 lakh children with disabilities. The scheme was introduced with a view to provide educational opportunities for children with disabilities in general schools to facilitate their retention in the school system. It provides for facilities to students with disabilities, including expenses on books and stationery, expenses on uniforms, transport allowance, reader allowance, escort allowance, hostel accommodation, and actual cost of equipment. The scheme also supports the appointment of special teachers, provision for resource rooms, and removal of architectural barriers in schools. Some of the salient features of the proposed scheme for inclusive education of the disabled at secondary stage. Children with disabilities form one of the largest groups that are still outside the fold of the general education system. The proposed scheme by the central government for inclusive education of the disabled at secondary stage, IEDSS, is therefore envisaged to enable children and young persons with disabilities access to secondary education and to improve their enrollment, retention, and achievement in the general system education. Aims and objectives. The centrally sponsored IEDSS scheme aims to enable all students with disabilities completing 8 years of elementary schooling an opportunity to complete 4 years of secondary schooling, that is, classes 9 to 12, in an inclusive and enabling environment, provide educational opportunities and facilities to students with disabilities in the general education system at the secondary level, that is, classes 9 to 12, and support the training of general schools teachers to meet the needs of children with disabilities at the secondary level. Now, the objectives of the scheme will be to ensure that every child with disability will be identified at the secondary level and their educational needs assessed. Every student in need of aids and appliances, assistive devices will be provided the same. All architectural barriers in schools are removed so that students with disability have access to classrooms, laboratories, libraries, and toilets in the school. Each student with a disability will be supplied learning material as per the requirement. All general school teachers at the secondary level will be provided basic training to teach students with disabilities within a period of 3 to 5 years. Students with disabilities will have access to support services like the appointment of special educators, establishment of resource room in every block. Model schools are set up in every state to develop good replicable practices in inclusive education. Target group. The scheme will cover all children of age 14 to 18 plus passing out of elementary schools and studying in secondary stage in government, local body and government aided schools with one or more disabilities as defined under the Persons with Disabilities Act 1995 and the National Trust Act 1999 in the age group 14 plus to 18 plus, that is classes 9 to 12, such as blindness, low vision, leprosy cured, hearing impairment, locomotor disabilities, mental retardation, mental illness, autism, cerebral palsy, and may eventually cover speech impairment and learning disabilities, etc. Girls with disabilities will remain as special focus and efforts would be made under the scheme to help them gain access to secondary schools as also to information and guidance for developing their potential. Types of scheme. This is a centrally sponsored scheme under which the central government will assist the states or union territories in its implementation on the basis of criteria laid down. Assistance for all the items covered in the scheme will be on 100% basis, but assistance for the program would be subject to policy guidelines issued and initiatives to be taken by the appropriate government for implementing the educational provisions of the PWD Act. Now, the components of the scheme. It is proposed to provide for educational facilities under this scheme for all children with disabilities that are included in general schools at the secondary and senior secondary level, that is classes 9 to 12. The scheme will include assistance for two kinds of components, including the first one, student beneficiary oriented components. The second, other components, for example, those relating to infrastructure, teacher training, awareness generation, etc. Now, for the first group of components, it is proposed to provide assistance to states at rupees 3,000 per disabled child per annum on the pattern of Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, which provides assistance at rupees 1,200 per disabled child per annum for the elementary level. This rate was fixed in the year 2001 to 2002. Now, this amount of rupees 3,000 per disabled child per annum may be spent on the following components also. That is, identification and assessment of children with disabilities. The assessment team may include an interdisciplinary expert team of special educators, clinical psychologists, therapists, doctors, and any other professional support based on the student's need. Provision of aids and appliances to all students with disabilities needing them if these are not already being provided for through existing schemes like ADIP, state schemes, voluntary organization, Rotary clubs, etc. Access to learning material ensuring that each disabled student will have access to learning materials as per the requirement like Braille textbooks, audio tapes, etc. Textbooks in large prints and any other material needed. Provision of facilities like transport facilities, hostel facilities, scholarships, books, uniforms, assistive devices, support staff like readers and amanuenses. Stipend for girl students with disabilities. Since girl students with disabilities face discrimination, they, in addition to availing facilities under all schemes specially targeting girls' education, will be given a stipend at rupees 200 per month at the secondary level to encourage their participation up to the senior secondary level. The use of ICT. Access to technology is especially relevant for the disabled as it increases their access to vast amount of information not otherwise available. Computers provided to students in secondary schools will also be made accessible to those with the disabilities. The scheme will provide for the purchase of appropriate technology by way of special software such as speech recognition software and programs to develop computer vocabulary for the hearing impaired and modified hardware like adapted keyboards. Development of teaching learning material. The scheme will cover the expenses incurred on organizing the mobilization of such support as certified by the school principal or the educational administrators. Financial assistance under this scheme will be available for purchase or production of instructional materials for the disabled and also for purchase of equipment required therefore. Wherever necessary, the available material will be translated and produced in regional languages. The scheme will also support workshops for adaptation in the circular content and development of supplementary material, self-learning material for teachers and students at the secondary level of school education. External support from an interdisciplinary team of experts such as educational psychologists, speech and occupational therapists, physiotherapists, mobility instructors, and medical experts have to be coordinated at the local level. Support can be made available at the cluster level, and needs of children with disabilities in a cluster of schools may be addressed. The expenses incurred on mobilizing such support in the form of TA or DA and consultancy fee will be covered under the scheme for children and young persons with disabilities at the secondary school level. Funds may be drawn from the child-specific funds of rupees 3,000 per child. Costs of non-beneficiary oriented components like teacher training, construction and equipping of resource rooms, creating model schools, research and monitoring etc. will be covered separately. These components would be as follows. Removal of architectural barriers to ensure students with disabilities have access to each classroom, laboratory, library and toilet in the school. A detailed manual laying out norms and guidelines for accessibility required by different types of disability will be developed at the central level with the help of the Office Chief Commissioner of Persons with Disabilities, that is CCPD, and the Rehabilitation Council of India, that is RCI. The scheme will support development of the accessible physical environment in existing secondary school buildings. Training of general school teachers. All teachers at the secondary level will be trained in particular strategies like making educationally useful assessments, planning an individualized and different curriculum, teaching styles which include audiovisual aids, appropriate instructional strategies, etc. Orientation of principals, educational administrators. This training will include developing strategies for management of inclusive education. This will also include teachers, both special and general, local educational administrators and head teachers. Strengthening of training institutions and assistance to existing organizations or NGOs to develop teachers training program in inclusive schooling and for educational interventions for specific disabilities. Provision of resource rooms and equipment for the resource rooms in one school per block or urban cluster. Norms in terms of accessible features will be developed with the support of relevant agencies at the central and state level. Appointment of special educators. Support from special educators will differ at the secondary level from that at the elementary level. Any school where the number of children with disabilities is more than 5 at the secondary and senior secondary level will have one special educator. In accordance with this ratio, the requisite number of special teachers will be appointed in schools or for a cluster of schools for children requiring special teacher support on permanent basis. Creating model inclusive schools in cooperation with the appropriate government and the NGOs so as to accelerate the process of education of children and youth with disabilities with initiatives from parents, teachers, community and the respective governments. The scheme will support models of inclusive schooling practices in cooperation with the appropriate government and NGOs so as to accelerate the process of education of children and youth with disabilities at the initiative of parents, teachers, community and the respective governments. Norms will be developed at the central level with the help of relevant state and national level agencies to provide the whole range of support for these schools. Funds for these will be charged towards the research component. Administration, research and development and monitoring and evaluation. These will form an integral part of the IEDSS scheme. The state government or the NGOs will have to formulate proposals for designing and developing a new assistive devices, ICT technology, teaching aids, special teaching materials or such other items as necessary to give a child with disability equal opportunity in education. Every year, 5% of the funds available at the central level will be earmarked for administration, innovative and R&D projects and monitoring and evaluation. The scheme will provide funds only in cases where there are no other provisions for the items under other schemes operative at the state or central level. Other support. At the secondary level, all children with disabilities included under the general education system may not require adaptations in the teaching learning process and evaluation procedures. However, there may be some who would require some adaptations. The state or union territories can take the support of special teachers, SCERTs, DIETs, special schools, resource centers, non-governmental organizations, state boards, and any other community institutions available at the local level for this purpose. Adaptations in examination procedures. Some children with disabilities may require some adaptations in the evaluation procedures according to their special needs. The existing evaluation procedures can be reviewed at the state level and modified accordingly. Provision for alternative modes of examination for children and the youth with disabilities should be considered and provided by the board of the examination. This is being visualized mainly as a process of issuing appropriate orders and notifications. Separate budgets as such is not planned under the scheme. Partnerships and linkages. The linkages with the different ministries, organizations like Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Government of India, Rehabilitation Council of India RCI, National Trust, etc. will help in creating convergence of resources and funds for addressing the needs of children with disabilities. Coordination committees at various levels, that is, state, district and sub-district levels, will help the planning and implementation of inclusive education at the secondary level. Regulations for relaxation of rules. The state governments or the union territories, administrations, other implementing agencies will make provisions for relaxation of rules relating to admissions, minimum or maximum age limit for admission, promotion and examination procedure so as to facilitate in improving access of children with disabilities to education. Implementing agencies. The scheme will be implemented either by the state governments directly or through state implementation societies created for the purpose, which may be headed by the Education Secretary to the state government. States may involve non-governmental organizations, NGOs, having experience in the field of education of the disabled in the implementation of the scheme. Monitoring and evaluation. Appropriate structures will be established at the central, state, district and block and the city level to ensure obtaining feedback from functionaries at the different levels. At the national level, a comprehensive monitoring mechanism would be evolved in MHRD with involvement of national apex level institutes like the NCERT and NIEPA and reputed voluntary organizations and individual experts. Data on enrollment and performance of children with disabilities at the secondary stage in performa to be developed at the central level will need to be maintained by the states. The state governments will oversee the utilization of money and collect the quantitative data and prepare state-specific report and forward it to the MHRD monitoring unit. State-appointed local monitoring committees would follow the guidelines and use the common evaluation format. The monitoring arrangements will include both qualitative and quantitative data. In addition to monitoring, review exercises can be undertaken periodically. Parents and village education committees will be involved in the monitoring process, especially qualitative aspects in schools. Collaborations with SCERTs, state and district resource centers, block, cluster level resources will be developed for this purpose. University departments, IASEs and CTEs will be involved wherever available. Now the major areas of difference in the existing scheme and the proposed schemes are as follows. Change in the nomenclature. The existing scheme is called Integrated Education for the Disabled Children IEDC. The proposed scheme will be called Scheme for Inclusive Education of the Disabled at IEDSS. The scope of this is the existing scheme provides for educational facilities for the disabled children for their integration in the normal schools from early childhood care and education up to the senior secondary level. Types of disabilities. Existing scheme covers the following categories of disabilities: orthopedically handicapped, visual impairment, partially sighted and low vision, hearing impaired, and mentally retarded. The proposed scheme will cover all the disabilities defined in the Disability Act and the National Trust Act 1995. Now, this would imply the following disabilities over and above those covered in the old scheme, like leprosy cured, mental illness, autism, cerebral palsy, and multiple disabilities. The new scheme may also cover learning disabilities after necessary consultations are held in this behalf. Implementation. The existing scheme is implemented through the state government, union territory administrations, autonomous organizations of stature having experience in the field of education and or rehabilitation. In the new scheme, proposals of the state governments, including those of NGOs, will be submitted by the state implementation societies to the ministry for consideration by the project monitoring unit. Funds will be sanctioned directly to the state implementation society. There will be no direct funding of NGOs at ministry level. Awareness program. There is no provision in the existing scheme. The proposed scheme will support programs to develop positive community attitudes towards children with disabilities and enhance respect for them. These programs will include educating the local media, general teachers, parents of children with disabilities, and community leaders among the changing views regarding the disabled, the relevance of inclusive education, and the significance of promoting positive models or success stories. Financial assistance up to Rs 10,000 per program is the envisaged in the proposed scheme. Research. There is no provision under the existing IEDC scheme. The state government or NGOs would formulate proposals for designing and developing new assistive devices, ICD technology, teaching aids, special teaching materials, or such other items are as necessary to give a child with disability equal opportunity in education. Every year, 5% of the funds available at the central level will be earmarked for innovative and research and development projects. Conclusion. Children with disabilities constitute one of the largest groups that are still outside the fold of general education system. Under the existing IEDC scheme, it has not been possible to cover all the disabled children primarily because implementation has been based on receipt of viable proposals from the implementing agencies. No conscious effort has been made to target all the disabled children. As Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan supports inclusion of children with special needs at the early childhood education and elementary education level, it is desirable to introduce a scheme for the disabled children at the secondary stage. The scheme for IEDSS is therefore envisaged to enable all children and young people with disabilities to have access to secondary education and to improve their enrollment, retention, and achievement in the general education system. Under the scheme, every school is proposed to be made disabled friendly.